joining me today. Um, I wanted to bring you on to get your message out to a younger demographic, and I just think that time is of the essence. Your message is wonderful, and people need to wake up. You can unpack some serious topics, and I really want all this information out on the internet, or me being some sort of force multiplier on your end for what the work you have going on before November. I have no idea what's going to happen with all this. But anyway, Leo, if you want to introduce yourself, and then we get started here on your book 9.
Sure. Actually, I wanted to talk about 9, 10, and maybe introduce to your audience the whole series of my confessions by briefly also describing, let's say, how it all came together. It was a project which I started now 14 years ago, after I started my experience on the internet with a blog which was rather successful called Confessions of an Illuminati, that led to censorship and my arrest in Norway and many other things that happened in my life. So at one point I kind of decided it was maybe about time to dedicate myself to writing books rather than just appearing on the internet or writing blogs, because as you know, people, when they read blogs, they have a limited attention span, and so it's 1 or 2 pages. But when you have this kind of topics, you really need hundreds of pages. And I wanted to also debunk the criticism which I had received initially. People, when somebody suddenly comes in front of them on the internet, especially in those early days, there was a lot of trolls, a lot of skepticism, and I mean, it's fine to be skeptic, but I wanted to also bring out evidence in the form of documents, in the form of photos, in the form of documentation which I could produce and could attest, which I was that I was a member of certain organizations, that I had a prior experience in what is now commonly referred to as the New World Order. And so I think that it's important today to understand that my confessions came out of necessity to try to also bring out a controversial argument that by that point had been maybe too much portrayed in the realm of fiction, with the people like Dan Brown, and of course that kind of thing led to people taking not too seriously certain things, when instead this is a very serious topic. The Illuminati might not be the Illuminati that we discussed in the past on the internet in a superficial way. They are instead a very profound topic that once you start analyzing, like I did from volume 1 of my confessions onwards, it really discloses a whole world that requires numerous volumes. And that's why I ended up with volume 10 today, which is actually my latest work, which is based on Islamic Freemasonry and the secret societies behind the eternal conflict in the Middle East, as well as volume 9, which I would suggest for those people who have never read my prior books, because it is a book that actually you can read without having any knowledge of my prior work, and you can understand because it's kind of put together in 7 steps that describe how this new world disorder is evolving in front of our eyes, and also how we are arriving to the dim reality of Cyber Satan, which is really what is happening today. Cyber Satan is what it's a description which I've coined for the artificial intelligence. And Cyber Satan is a topic that I touch in 3 books that I wrote, volume 6.66, volume 7, and volume 9. And so it's an important topic for me, but it's also part of the future of humanity. We had just today at the G7 in Italy, the last couple of days actually, a lot of people discussing and debating artificial intelligence, including the Pope, for example, that it's kind of paradoxical a little bit, because he's completely enamored with science. During the pandemic, he embraced fully science, left, right, and center. And so today we have instead a reality in front of us that shows us that maybe he should have stick to religion rather than embracing science during that pandemic. Just a second, because I have some air conditioning problems I want to sort out. Just a second. Okay, sorry. Here we have very high temperatures in the desert in Southern California that are reaching 110, 115. So it's like air conditioning needs to be pushed the maximum capacity, otherwise I will start melting in front of you. Okay, so what I was saying is that the way the Confessions of an Illuminati is elaborated is based on facts. There is no speculation. There is sources which are at times academic, at times internal sources from the various secret societies, or society with secrets, because Freemasonry is not really a secret society. Everybody knows about it. You find the writing at the entrance of every town in America. So I mean, it's not really a secret society, but it is a society with a lot of secrets. So we have, I think, in Confessions of an Illuminati, a way of introducing gradually the audience that wants to know a little bit more, but also wants to know a little bit more of a subject that touches everybody in our daily lives. So it often refers to the past, but is still present today with us, and it's of course working behind the scenes to manipulate and craft a reality. In all this, there is a pyramid that I can, if you want, describe for your audience.
Please, yes. The structure.
So it's it easy for maybe having. Yeah, I would say that the pyramid on top, on the right at the top, doesn't really include the Illuminati, but rather the people who control the Illuminati, which is, it's even more probably confusing for certain people who have an idea that the Illuminati might be the ultimate people on top of it all and controlling everything, when instead they are the Luciferian court in the hands of the Jesuits and the Sabbatean Frankists. And so who are the Jesuits? The Jesuits are an order that has been present in the Vatican for almost 500 years. It's an order that had problems with the Vatican. At some point in the 1770s, it was kicked out of the Catholic Church, and it took until the early 19th century to actually get back into the church. And nowadays they have even a pope. So they have been a controversial order within the Catholic Church, because they were born not as a simple religious order, but rather as a military order that had to go and fill up a empty space that was made after the disappearance of the Knights Templars. So up until the Reformation, the Catholic Church maybe didn't see the necessity for something like that. But when you start having the Reformation, then the Counter-Reformation that the Vatican moved against these breakaway factions that constitute the early Protestants, and of course at that point they needed something different, and also different maybe way of different modality, a different way of acting, and the Jesuits were were totally unscrupulous. They were totally driven by a blind belief that anything could be done if it was done for the Pope. Especially the Jesuits were built around this concept of an order which only the people on top, the fourth vow, really knew what was going on. And they were made in charge of operations within the Catholic Church that were made to infiltrate and to at times even murder people. So the Jesuits today will never admit certain things, maybe, but the fourth vow is this religious and solemn vow that the Jesuits take and give a complete blind belief to the fact that they have to protect, and they have to protect not Jesus or Christianity, but rather the Pope. So it's a special obedience to the sovereign pontiff in regards to the missions. And according to the apostolic letters and the constitutions of the order that emanated from the days of Saint Ignatius Loyola, who was its founder. Saint Ignatius was actually at the beginning condemned by the Inquisition. He was connected to the Illuminati of the time, which were called the Alumbrados in Spain, which was a Gnostic sect. I explain in volume 9 that the Gnostics are really the early Illuminati. If we want to talk about the heresies that constituted the early Illuminati, they manifested in the Christian realm with the Gnostics, which, as you know, gave birth to a variety of controversial beliefs that were not accepted by the Christianity that was shaped by the Council of Nicaea and the councils after that. So the attachment that the Jesuits have for the church and their willingness to accept whatever service the church asks is a little bit like 007 at Her Majesty's Secret, you know, like 007 who is with license to kill. That's what they have. They have license to kill. And they actually are considered very important within the intelligence community worldwide, because in Spezia, which is their main headquarters where Ignazio Loyola was born, they have apparently an archive which is bigger than the one of the Central Intelligence Agency. So they work in a covert way, and they act as the intelligence of the church. On top of that, of course, we have, I remember prior to the show, you sent me a note and you wanted to discuss the Vatican secret archives somehow. The Vatican secret archives are today an expression of that secrecy that the Vatican carries on through the centuries to try to retain their knowledge for the privileged few. And the Jesuits, of course, with other religious orders, as you know, did a lot to constitute educational services like their universities. The University of the Jesuits here in this country, like Georgetown, have a very important role. But even in Georgetown University, you have a couple of secret societies, which were one of them even established by the Jesuits, who constitute an internal way of then selecting the elite and working for the Jesuits. So the Illuminati are always present. Of course, the Illuminati, which I described, is not only the Illuminati of Adam Weishaupt, which was established in 1776, though he was also somebody who was born within a Jesuit context, because he was a professor of canon law at Ingolstadt University, which had been a university of the Jesuits. But when the Jesuits, like I told you just a moment ago, were kicked out in the 1770s, he found himself with the faculty of canon law, and in 1776 he gave birth to this Illuminati order. But the Illuminati were not established in 1776. They had existed since the mystery schools of old, so they predate this by thousands of years. We're talking about Egypt, for example, Alexandria of Egypt in particular, Memphis. These were the basis of the mystery schools of the Illuminati. If there is a place where the Illuminati were born more than any other place in the world, it's definitely Egypt. And if there is a place that we might indicate is today's Cairo, one of the places, and Giza also, which is a very important location. Of course, everybody knows Giza because of the pyramids that we see, but it is the third largest city in Egypt by area after Cairo and Alexandria, and it's also there which part of the Illuminati were established. So when we see the Giza pyramids, we see, for a profane eye, simply a burial place. But in reality, these were places where people were initiated inside those chambers. There were secret chambers inside the pyramid, and they were utilized. And of course, Freemasonry has been very much inspired by the secret societies of the Middle East. That's where all this knowledge came from initially, either from Egypt or either from ancient Sumeria. It all comes from there. So it's obvious that the original Illuminati came from there and then spread through the Western world, especially though during the collapse of the Roman Empire and the successive period, there was a crisis in Europe that generated what we know as the Dark Ages. The Dark Ages of medieval times are well known, and the Dark Ages was the moment in which probably Europe was not so illuminated, let's say. So that knowledge that the Illuminati recovered, and of course the original Illuminati also in the mindset of certain initiates are also the Rosicrucians, comes from Moorish, south of Spain, Moorish Spain, through then the period of the Renaissance. So we have suddenly the rediscovery of this knowledge that was lost during the Dark Ages. But for the people who are following us today, of course, all this might be a little bit confusing. So just to, in a nutshell, to make it more easy, the Illuminati themselves, that are always portrayed with an all-seeing eye, in reality, the Illuminati Wadenbeschaft were portrayed with an owl, which was more like
Bohemian Grove, or
this kind of, they are the symbol. It's of course a symbol connected to also the goddess Minerva, the Minerva goddess. So there is definitely a lot of confusion, I think, in what the Illuminati really are, and even if they exist, because a lot of people say, you know, the classic debunkers of the Illuminati would say the Illuminati were founded in 1776. In the 1780s, they were already dismantled. However, like I just said, the Illuminati Wadenbeschaft were just one of the emanations of this ancient mystery school. In fact, there was, even at the time of Wadenbeschaft, another group in Avignon in France, known as the Illuminati of Avignon, founded by a monk called Dom Pernetti, and they were equally as influential in that moment in the Western initiatic system. So, as you can see, then I think that the people focus so much attention on Wadenbeschaft, and I described the importance here of why Wadenbeschaft picked up the ancient Gnostic beliefs and included them in his teachings. Like other people like Albert Pike or John Yarker, these people picked up on the teachings of the Gnostics, at times with a little bit of confusion, because they didn't have yet all the knowledge that we have today after the recent archaeological discoveries. So their knowledge, though, was to mix a little bit of the Essen sect with the Gnostics. The Essens in reality were a schismatic Jewish part of the Jewish faith. They were not Gnostic. So you see, there was already a bit of confusion. But because the essence, in reality, might have had dealt with Jesus at the time of Jesus, so there was also a lot of confusion generated by the Gnostics, who were the Illuminati of the time, who used Jesus as an image to then filter their own heretical Gnostic beliefs, which are much more ancient and come from ancient Sumerian, come from also other traditions. The Middle East is filled with beliefs and traditions like the Zoroastrian tradition, which is a very ancient tradition, for example. Adam Weishaupt was very much obsessed with the Zoroastrians, for example, aside from the Gnostics. So I try to explain to people what the real Illuminati are, how they operate, their beliefs, and the fact that in what we consider today the modern heirs to the Illuminati, we have different levels and different approaches, because the Illuminati of Adam Weishaupt were the first ones who really went for the political side of things. They were not interested in the esoteric, they were interested in power. They were interested in administering this power, in infiltrating groups like the Freemasons and the esoteric groups to manipulate them for political means, which was the destruction of the church and the religions, the destruction of the monarchies, because the monarchies themselves were protecting Christianity, at least the monarchies in Europe. So they had to be destroyed. And the Illuminati were rather successful, even if the Order of Adam Weishaupt was dismantled soon after his foundation. Adam Weishaupt was not arrested. He still kept conducting his work in secret, and he simply said to his followers to change the name of the order with other names. That's why suddenly you have a lot of names. And you just mentioned just a moment ago the Bohemian Club. The Bohemian Club is one of those groups. It actually emanates from the Schalarafia. The Schalarafia are still to this day a secret society of Germans. Is a kind of a joy for those secret society, and they're not really that secret. It's a little bit like the Freemasons. I mean, all over the world where you have German people of German descent, they like to meet in castles and have this the Schalarafia. It's a secret society that is very successful, and they influenced together with the Asian Brethren, which was another secret society founded by the cousin of Jacob Frank, which was the father of the Frankists. You have the Sabbateans, and then you have the Sabbatean Frankists. This is an heresy within Judaism, which sits right at the top of all this system. So as you can see, it's very complex, this whole world, and it's very confusing for people who don't know it. That's why I always tell the people who follow these subjects to take them very seriously and to not just read a couple of pages on the internet and think you know everything about what goes on in the Illuminati, because that would be stupid and also very naive. Because think about it. Do you think that this kind of knowledge that's been around for thousands of years will be simply poured on the internet on one page, 2 pages, and then everybody knows? I mean, it doesn't make any sense. This is knowledge that comes from people which have big balls and big heads with a lot of knowledge, and they call Illuminati because they are actually very smart. Very smart. So these are people who have studied all the philosophers of ancient times, have elaborated complex beliefs, and you can't just diminish the whole thing and say, okay, there is a group of people that dominates the world, they meet up here. It doesn't work like that. It would be very naive and very stupid to say that. Instead, it's a very complex reality. We are talking more of an Illuminati network rather than one singular body of knowledge that dominates all the others.
A syndicate, if you will.
Yeah, and then also you have, on top of that, the fact that you have Freemasonry, which itself is divided in various forms of Freemasonry, because then Freemasonry was infiltrated by the Illuminati, and in the 1870s in France broke from regular Freemasonry. The Grand Orient of France gave the possibility to the atheists to finally join Freemasonry, and they changed the absolute belief in the great architect of the universe with a belief in nothing, basically, and instead of having a volume of the sacred law, which from 1813 became the Bible or the Quran or another holy book, it will be just a book of white pages, because it will not, the belief, the religious belief will not be any longer important in that form of Freemasonry, which the Grand Orient of France promotes to this day. Of course, Grand Orient of France has also rites of perfection, like the ancient and accepted Scottish rite, and other rites that work their own belief system in their own way. But the fact that today we have two forms of Freemasonry in the world. One is the one connected to the United Lodge of England, and so that is the recognition. It's the standard is that you have to be recognized by the United Lodge of England to be a regular obedience. And here in America, every single state has their own Grand Lodge of ancient and accepted Freemasons, and they have to be regularly recognized by England, otherwise they will be no longer part of this network. On the other side, you have the Grand Lodge de France, which gave birth to this progressive form of Freemason in certain bodies of Freemason connected to them, and on top of that, it sealed an alliance with the Grand Lodge de France, which is another important Masonic obedience born in France right at the beginning of the Masonic, let's say, the Masonic era starts in 1717 in England with the constitution of the first Grand Lodge by a number of lodges. Up until then, lodges always worked singularly. They didn't have a network of mutual recognition or of mutual assistance. By that moment onwards, instead, the change with it was the Grand Lodge of England. It was initially the Grand Lodge of England. Then Grand Lodge of England started to have problems because there was a division of two factions, the modern and the ancients, and these two factions believed in a slightly different forms of Freemasonry. Ultimately, in 1813, they melted and they created the United Grand Lodge of England. But having said all this, America, as you know, is a country founded by Freemasons. Freemasons like George Washington. Now, we like to think that these people were actually people that had Christian beliefs. And in fact, if we go back to the origins of Freemason, we see that it was a preventively Christian endeavor. Up to 1813, only Christians could join. The shape of lodges, like I show in volume 4 of my Confessions, was made in the form of a cross, even in certain Masonic rites. There was also, like the strict temple observance, the obligation of being a Christian to join Freemasonry. And still to this day, in certain parts of the world, in one particular part of the world actually, which is Scandinavia, which I lived many years in Scandinavia, you have the Swedish Rite, which only permits Christians to join their lodges. So it's a different kind of approach from universal Freemasonry that was shaped later on, because from 1813 onwards, when the Duke of Sussex united these two forms of Freemasonry in England, they opened up to non-Christians. The British Empire was expanding, and Freemasonry became a way of inclusivity. So including Muslims, Jews, and Christians in the same temple, maybe putting 3 volumes of the sacred law on the altar, let's say, let's call it, even if it's an improper name. There would be, at that point, an understanding between people of different faiths. You see, Freemasonry, speculative Freemasonry, born in 1717, and then in the 1720s we have the Constitution, the Anderson Constitution, that was written by a reverend, It was written by a reverend because Freemasonry started in this modern speculative form. We say speculative because operative means people that actually build something. Speculative is people who speculate on those symbols. They use them as an allegory. Those people in England thought it would be a good idea because England had been really entrenched in wars of religion since the times that saw also the first pilgrims escaping and coming here to America also. No, even prior to that, they had a couple of centuries of intense religious infight between Christians of different denominations that were shaping up at that point. Okay, so what happens here? Let's put them all together again in one organization. Even if you are Catholic, you are Protestant, you're this and you that, let's bring Christians all together. That was the initial purpose of Freemasonry. But when it expanded, they wanted to do the same things with other religions. And so it comes into the fold. Though Islamic Freemasonry, it's like something that expands in the territory that was controlled by the Ottoman Empire and became the ideal way of sabotaging and forcing eventually the Ottoman Empire to implode, because the French and the English and the Scottish, I mean, Great Britain, they had both Scottish and English lodges in the Middle East, and the French, a lot of other lodges. Their main point was to get the Ottoman Empire to implode. And that is what led to, unfortunately, the present situation in the Middle East, because from that moment onwards, there was the Sykes-Picot Agreement of 1916, then we have the Balfour Declaration of 1918 that brought back the Jews in Israel. But it was actually Freemasonry in England that constituted with the Anglicans what is known as British Israelism. On the contrary of countries like France or Germany that will end up having some moments of persecution against the Jews, the British population never really had, fortunately, any moments of persecution. But the Brits were a little bit more subtle in their ways. They had made an alliance with certain elements in the Jewish society. People like the Rothschilds, Montefiore, man, these are important people. Disraeli became the prime minister of Queen Victoria. I mean, talking about important figures. They wanted them to go back to their country of origin, the promised land, because it became like a project that Freemasonry wanted to bring forward in order to then get back to Jerusalem and then start eventually the construction of the Third Temple. So if today we have all these problems in the Middle East, they were triggered earlier on by the interest of these people in the Western world. The people that, though, are also responsible for the great Jewish persecution that unfortunately we had in Russia, in Germany, and in other countries. I mean, the pogroms. Ultimately, we had the Holocaust, but Russia was the first place that really persecuted Jews. And this persecution led also to the printing of a book, which is the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which became also a very controversial text. It is, of course, a book that needs to be interpreted in the correct way, and is never interpreted in the correct way, because it usually becomes an anti-Semitic tool, when instead it should be simply reinterpreted, as I explained this last part of this book, as a Sabbatean Frankist situation. So the Protocols of the Elders of Zion should be the Protocols of the Sabbatean Elders of Zion. That will make people understand the reality of it, because the worst enemy of the Jews, unfortunately, are the Jews in this case, who betrayed Judaism, like Shabbatai Zevi, who was this gentleman who came around because his father was a British intelligence asset, even if we were in the early days, let's remember that British intelligence has almost 500 years of history, and it starts from Queen Elizabeth I. It starts from the moment in which you had the people like Sir Francis Bacon, you had other people like John Dee, who even signed himself 007. These are topics which I discussed in volume 1 of my confession, but in this book here, I also explain how the Freemasons of the West, especially the English, initiated certain figures in the Muslim world, in Egypt, in Turkey, in other places, in the Middle East, and those figures became tools to destabilize and eventually bring the Middle East under the control of Great Britain and France. And this happened eventually, but it took centuries. And in the meantime, the Freemasons of the West sealed a secret alliance with many Sufi fraternities, because the Sufis are a secret society, they're not only a Muslim modality. I mean, the Sufis, a lot of people think of Sufism like simply Muslim spirituality or Islamic spirituality. In reality, the Sufis were born within the Shiite world, immediately when the two factions divided, the Sunni and the Shiite, and absorbed a lot of the previous cultures that were in the Middle East. So the Manichaeans, the Gnostics, the Zoroastrians, all this knowledge didn't simply evaporate because the Islamic armies arrived with the Shimita, cut your throat. No, they absorbed this knowledge. They absorbed this knowledge that was kept in secret, and that's why secret societies became prevalent in the Middle East and will influence later on secret societies in the West. Even the Freemasons themselves are inspired by the Middle East, and in particular by the Brethren of Sincerity of the city of Haran, that preserved Hermetic knowledge from the Muslims by simply stating that they were believers they were the Sabians, which nobody knew what they were, but they appeared in the Quran, so that was enough for sparing them from persecution. You see, the Muslims don't persecute the people who are in the book. They simply force them to pay extra tax. And that is the way. It's like the IRS coming to your door and saying, okay, we have this tax. No, we have this tax for you, but you can avoid it if you bend down 5 times a day towards Mecca. You don't pay this tax. The guy would say, okay, fine, I'm gonna do whatever you want. So there is a lot of misconception at times on how Islam was so pervasive and how it arrived to eradicate prior faiths. But at times it was just a matter of interest. I mean, I invade your town, you were a Christian, you were a Jew, you were making money, but if you became Muslim, you will make more money because you will not be forced into paying extra tax. And at the same time, you could also be welcome in the higher levels of the society, where maybe Christians and Jews were not really permitted in certain institutions. So it was at times a mode of convenience. Of course, a lot of people refused that. For example, Christian Copts in Egypt, they've been one of the oldest Christian churches in the world. They're still present, still fighting for their identity and their survival, surrounded by Muslims. During the Fatimid dynasty, which was a Shia dynasty that lasted over 2 centuries in Egypt, initially they were not only tolerated, but they could totally live tranquil, and also the Jews were. In the Fatimid era, initially, it was all fine. Then suddenly, after a century, this 6th caliph arrived who started to persecute the Sunni, which were the rival faction, but then started to persecute instead the Jews and the Christians, destroying churches, destroying synagogues, and creating something that was completely unseen of in a society that was very tolerant previously. So the history of the Illuminati is very important to understand that is connected with Islam from the very beginning, because the Rosicrucians, for example, we just study the Fama Fraternitatis, and we see that the Christian Rosenkreuz, which is this mythological, legendary figure that is more of an allegory for some people than a real historical figure, is meant to come from Cyprus, enter the Middle East, go and get initiated and pick up all their knowledge, then re-entering from Spain, and then going back into Europe and going back into Germany, where it brings this knowledge. Now, in the Fama Fraternitatis, it says the guy goes to the city of Fez, and he gets initiated to the elementals that we see also presented by Paracelsus, where these entities that resemble also the genies of Islam. And so the Illuminati, who of course also derive and went through the whole period that we know as the Rosicrucian era, that was constituted with this manifesto, was very important in Europe, because suddenly these manifestos appeared in the main cities like Paris and in German cities, and everybody was like very curious about, but nobody ever connected it to Islam, because they were also rather critical of Muhammad. But when you go and study actually the Fraternitatis, you find this link, the fact that there was always a connection with the Middle East, where the knowledge comes from, and the same with the Freemasons. And so that's why I dedicated my last book in particular to Islamic Freemasonry, because Islamic Freemasonry was probably existing before any other form of Freemasonry with other names. It eventually, of course, the moment in which the Westerners brought the speculative Freemasonry into the Middle East, they saw the similarities, they embraced the concept, and of course they inserted their own elements. Because people at times think about Freemasonry as a very unique, as a single ritual, a single thing. But in reality, there's many rituals, there is many rites, and many teachings, because Freemasonry goes and absorbs all the pre-existing mystery schools, especially when you join the fourth degree, which is when you join the Ancient and Accepted Scottish Rite, and you get into the first degree that is above Master Mason, you are immediately introduced to the fact that the Ancient Accepted Scottish Rite, it's a mix of all these mystery schools, including the Illuminati, and that brings it all together. And they actually tell you in the secret instructions that they give you in that degree. So Freemasonry is a way for the West of absorbing all these previous mystery schools, but of course today Freemasonry is not that influential as many people think. Only a limited amount of Freemasons might have power and influence. The majority, they simply live a social experience, like going to the Rotary Club, going to the Lions, going to... So if you have any other questions that might be of importance for you, we can...
Oh, yes, sir. No, I was just going to tell you that I joined Masonry to try and learn about all this stuff before you and I got to know each other. And I'll tell you what, it was quite underwhelming. I got my 32nd degree last year in Houston, and I really was expecting to learn something, going from the leap of third degree from the Blue Lodge here. And really, I was worried because it was quite liberal. So that's why.
Yes. Now that's another thing. When I came here to America, I moved here in 2019. I was forced to move here to America because of the persecution that I was subject to in Europe. Eventually, now this year, I became American, so I'm very happy to be a proud American after many years. And I have renounced to my Italian citizenship because I wanted to avoid any form of persecution. People don't understand that when you are actually with a double citizenship and you still retain your original citizenship, especially when it's Italian, the Constitution is still imposing on you, even if you live on the other side of the world. So I see people say, oh, why you give up your Italian citizenship? I said, because I want to go back to my country, maybe one day without being persecuted. And because they don't have a beautiful constitution like the American Constitution. As a journalist, as a writer, you can be arrested. It's not a lawsuit, a civil lawsuit, but it's a criminal lawsuit. And that's why how they silence the journalists in Italy. That's how the mafia silence. That's why if you go and see in the chart of the freedom of speech, Italy is number 52 behind some African countries, because people like me, journalists and authors, get persecuted and silenced. So Freemasonry for me was very important. I joined it in 1993. Earlier in my life, when I was 23, I joined an irregular form of Freemasonry. Because my initiator was actually a friend of my family, who was Prince Alliata di Montereale, who was in charge of the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite in Italy, because the ancient accepted Scottish Rite, as you know, by the Constitution, is connected to the sacred Roman Empire. That's where the symbol of the two eagles comes in. That is actually where it originally comes from. However, today here in America, it's a very different thing. I joined also later on regular Freemasonry, the United Grand Lodge of England. I was a member of Kirby Lodge 2818. I was also involved with the Grand Lodge de France. So I did very, which is considered irregular. So I was in the irregular Memphis and Missouri, where I became 1995. I was also 33 I am actually at the moment still an honorary 33 of the Supreme Council of Romania. So many other things, many things that I did during the years were because of my passion for the esoteric world, for the study of Freemasonry. I was a member of the Canonbury Masonic Research Center, which no longer exists. It terminated around 2012. It was started by the Marquis of Northampton, who was the Deputy Grand Master under the Duke of Kent. And so I was in my lodge with the elite of British Freemasonry. My mentor was Julian Rees, who is considered very famous. And then I had Tony Henley, who is the only one who knows all the rituals of Freemasonry in England by heart. So it's a kind of, and of course, these people were members also of other organizations like the Louis de Cohen, the Martinist, and the Società Rosicruciana in Anglia. I collaborated with Robert Gilbert in an investigation against the infiltration of the OTO. I worked with John Hamill, the Director of Communications of the United Grand Lodge of England, for a few years. So I did some serious work within Freemasonry, also as an historian, but I always worked between regular and irregular Freemasonry, because irregular Freemasonry is the Illuminati. John Yarker, for example, was obsessed with irregular, with all these rites, and he became the head of the ancient and primitive rite, the Memphis and Masonry, because that is something that is not recognized by regular Freemasonry, but it was deemed very interesting by the Illuminati. And today I also I was offered to have an active role in the Supreme Council of Romania not so long ago. I refused it because I am living now here in America. I'm no longer in Europe, and I don't feel the need. And also, I was very disappointed by Freemasonry when I came here to America, because here in California, I was met with the same progressive values that you witness in your time in Freemasonry. People, even the former Grand Master here who was against Trump, there were ship masters there that were picking up on people wearing MAGA hats when they were going inside the lodge. I didn't like this politics. You know, politics and religion shouldn't have a place in regular Freemasonry. They might have a place in irregular Freemasonry, but they don't have a place in regular Freemasonry. And it was very disappointing what I saw here with the tolerance of Satanism in front of my eyes. My wife, who actually was initiated in London in a irregular Memphis and Mizraim lodge by regular Freemason of the United Lodge of England, just to demonstrate how many regular Masons have double membership, which is not something that is authorized by the Masonic authorities, but people nevertheless do. But she was shocked when one day we went and visited a local lodge around here, which I used to go to, and there was just a guy parked with his pickup truck with a reverse pentagram in the back, and I asked, who is these people? And it is basically the newer people who are joining Freemasonry. A lot of them here in California belong to other esoteric groups that have nothing to do with Freemasonry, like the OTO and other, even Satanist, occultists that practice all kinds of demented stuff that has nothing to do with Freemasonry. So in the end, I think that unfortunately Freemasonry here is way too liberal, and I have already denounced in Volume 3 the connection between the members of the Grand Lodge of Colorado that were very active and Islamic groups, but Islamic groups that I expose in Volume 10 as criminal. I mean, Timothy Hogan, who has also founded a Neo-Templar group here in America, was guested by a guy called Arunyaya, who got 8,000 years of jail, over 8,000 years of jail for being a pedophile 2 years ago, and for human trafficking and sexual slavery and all kinds of things. So there is also very good Masons. And I have to be honest, because people, you know, the very good Masons I met during my life. I've been in Freemasonry for many years, and so I would be wrong in condemning all of Freemasonry. I met incredible Freemasons around the world, but the problem is that the majority of them and the institution of Freemasonry today seems to have been corrupt. So I'm not astonished. The 32nd degree today in America is given very easily, on the contrary of Europe. In Europe, it's very, very difficult to obtain any degrees above 18. And if you are included between the 30th that they still practice and the 30 and the 33, you are really considered that somebody who has been. I was very privileged because I was very knowledgeable of Freemasonry, and I had an aristocratic background that put me, because there is still a link with the aristocracy that you don't have here in America, of course, because here you don't have aristocratic families or monarchies. But in Europe, where you have them, there is still this link with Freemasonry. You see, for example, up until 1972, the King of Sweden was still the Grand Master of the Swedish Rite. And his ancestors were all Grand Masters of the Swedish Rite. So it was something you received through an heirship, through a bloodline. But the 32nd degree today at times is given here in America simply because they want you to join the Shriners. And the Shriners is something that I describe very much in this book, because they were inspired by a guy who was, they have the Fez. They were kicked out of Mecca, but they claim to have some kind of Islamic connection, even if when you go and study the rituals and you are involved with the Shriners. One of my mentors in England was Julian Smith, who is the head of the European Shriners. So I know a little bit about the Shriners, but in this book I also explain how the Shriners were born. The Shriners were inspired by a guy who himself had been initiated into the Druze, who are a very ancient form of religion within Shia Islam that kind of evolved in something else. Albert Leighton Rosen was an Orientalist. He was greatly influenced by Arab culture. He had been initiated into the Druze and co-founded the Nobles of the Mystic Shrine that, as you know, here in America, there is two factions, because then you have also the segregation of the blacks that created the alternative, created the Prince Hall Masons, and not only the Prince Hall Masons, but also the Shriners, the Black Shriners, which are completely different from the white ones. They have a different story. But they also influenced then later on the very birth of the Nation of Islam, of the Moorish culture, of the Moorish science. If today we have groups like the Nation of Islam, unfortunately, it's due to the fact that Afro-American Freemasonry, Black Freemasonry, however you want to call it, inspired also forms of religion. And these Shriners inspired eventually the first forms of Islam here indigenous to America, because the Moorish science was the first form of Islam here in America. Before you had the arrival of immigrants like we have today, and today we have more or less 6 million Muslims living in America who are American citizens. You had people who embraced Islam in their own way, and it wasn't the traditional form of Islam, but it was actually coming from Rosicrucians, Gnostics, and all that. Because if you go and study the very early birth of how Islam developed here in America, it's definitely a very different. Then, of course, we have the people who took the Shriners as a social, funny approach, and we have even Laurel and Hardy with the Sons of the Desert movie, which kind of is funny and it's entertaining and brings you. But we have to understand that Freemasonry developed in two separate directions in the same country, and it was only in the 1990s that the United Grand Lodge of England imposed to the obediences here in America to recognize their brothers in Prince Hall Freemasonry. For those who don't know, Prince Hall was a freed slave who established the first lodge for African Americans, and it's important to understand that actually there is a big influence by the to the establishment of the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite, because the history of the ancient accepted Scottish Rite comes from what we call today Haiti. And so it has some connections with that in the history of there was this connection with France, of course, and France, the Grand Lodge de France, is the place where the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite was originally established. And before, we are talking about before 1805, and of course the Mother Council and all that. But the early history, we are talking here about the very early histories of those degrees that were above the third degree. I'm talking about in general, what we define as today, of course, we have 33 degrees, but back then we had a number of rituals that then would influence the Scottish Rite. And of course, we can find the very early stages of the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite in France, because, as you know, it was Chevalier Ramsay in the 1730s who made this famous speech about the Templars as the origins of the craft, though that was always contested, and eventually was left for the high degrees, this interpretation, while the lower degrees interpret instead the origins of the craft as strictly coming from the guilds, and so that is where they say it comes from. With Islamic Freemasonry, we go back to the Assassins and the Knights Templars, because the Knights Templars were inspired by the Assassins. And so my book explains how the origin of Islamic Freemasonry then goes back as we here in the West were Christians, and we didn't really fight for any holy war until the Pope came up with this idea of the Crusades. But the idea of the Crusades and of doing a holy war and then establishing orders like the Order of the Holy Sepulchre, the Knights Templar, the Teutonic Knights, the Hospitallers, came from Islam, came from the fact that those people were killing themselves for a book, the Quran. Jesus didn't say to kill anybody in a holy war. It was the Pope who saw the expansion of Islam as a threat and wanted to imitate their concept of ribat. Ribat was the concept that was established in the early, from the early days of Islam, and eventually is now embraced, unfortunately, by the Salafi jihadists like Al-Qaeda or ISIS, in which you have a fortress, and in this fortress you have the people who fight for the jihad, and you protect also the mystics, but you protect most of all the pilgrims who are going to what they consider holy: Medina, Mecca, and of course Jerusalem. These are the three places that they consider holy. The Vatican saw this model and wanted to duplicate it. That's how the Templars were formed, and they shaped themselves on the model of the Assassins, even imitating the red cross. They didn't have a cross, but they have a white mantle like the Templars and all that. So this was imitated, and also the system of initiation. But the Assassins were a Nizari Shiite group that eventually will make an alliance with the Templars in secret, so they could fight the Seljuk Turks advancing of Saladin. So already then the Vatican saw that they could put one against the other, these different factions of Islam that were so divided between the Shiite and the Sunni, and putting them against each other, they could eventually control them and control the whole area. Now, the Knights Templars established themselves on the Temple Mount, which was, as you know, very important also for the Masons today, because the Temple of Solomon, we're talking about the very foundation of the whole thing, you know. So we have, of course, in the whole ancient and accepted Scottish Rite, you have a number of degrees which are given only orally, communicated, as you know, in knowledge, and there is those that you practice. Now, not all places practice certain degree, but for example, the 30th degree is regarded very important in Europe still, or in the northern jurisdiction still, but in the southern, so it depends, you know. Here they jump the degrees, they tend to jump to the 32. I don't know what kind of experience you had, but from the Master Mason degree, it's possible that they put you to the 32 in one day if you do one of those elaborate things where you watch the people on stage duplicating the rituals for you. Did you go through that kind of approach?
That's exactly it. They did what's called the terminal degrees, and it's the degrees that they deem that are more important.
And the other one, they communicate only orally. So you are meant to have those instructions without practicing it, or without meeting in a context of a lodge. And then, however, the actual knowledge of the Templars, as you know, comes with the 30th degree. Because prior to that, you have other knighthoods which are discussed, and others, you have, of course, a royal arch, but you have also other knighthoods which are discussed within the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite. And from the 30th to the 33, you are basically a Knights Templar. It's a bit like in the York degree. You have the Templar degree, which is the highest degree. In the Templar system, you have also higher degrees regarding the priesthood of the Templar, hypothetical. But the actual ancient and accepted Scottish Rite, people say, what are you when you arrive to the 33 degree? You are basically knowledgeable of all these mystery schools, of all this past knowledge, You just have to go through Albert Pike's teaching to understand what is also the reform that Pike conducted himself on this right, because let's not forget that it's extremely influential, the work that Pike did to reform this right, but not everybody in the world accepted the reforms of Pike. And Pike got in a big controversy with a guy, and I explained this in volume 10, called Adolphe Crémieux, who was the sovereign grand commander of the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite in France. He was also a member of the Memphis and Mizraim, and he was the one who commissioned the book of Maurice Joly that will be eventually used for the protocols of the Elders of Zion. So it's all interconnected, as you can see. But Crémieux and most Supreme Councils in Europe met in Lausanne. And this meeting gave birth to the more progressive side of Freemasonry. And Albert Pike actually didn't agree with them. And there was a big argument between Pike and Crémieux and these people. It was kind of a clash. So you see, Freemasonry is not really, as you know, it's a number of things together. And especially when you go through, and now you are a 32nd degree, you have, of course, the possibility of being welcome, for example, abroad in the Swedish Rite, because you are a 32 degree. They don't welcome people who are not 32 degrees in the Swedish Rite because they are a temporal system. Do you know that? So, for example, I had a friend of mine who was initiated first here in the 32 degree, so then he could go to the Swedish Rite, and then he could, because he was living in Sweden at the time, and then he could practice Freemasonry there. I remember there was a friend of mine who was an 18th degree from Cuba, and he wasn't allowed in the lodges in Norway because he wasn't a 30th degree. They will only allow you in the Swedish Rite if you were at least a 30th degree.
Yes, sir. The lodges with red crosses.
Because it's a red cross, the 12th degree of the Swedish Rite, which is the top of their system, it's actually an apron with a red cross. So this is, in this book, I explain how, though, Islamic Freemasonry merged with all these elements that were imported by the speculative Masons of Europe, and then they tended to bring their own system in, and then brought back stuff like the Shiites, or the Bektashi in particular, the Alevis. They formed lodges in Europe, and eventually Rudolf von Sembotendorf was initiated in Salonico instead and came back to Europe, though he was the one who brought the secret rituals of Turkish Freemasonry, which was not Turkish regular Turkish Freemasonry, but was actually something else, to Adolf Hitler, and he was the one who established the Thule Gesellschaft Lodge in 1919. So it's all interconnected, and some of the connections will shock people. And of course, Freemasons at times are a little bit naive of certain connections. But also, like you said, at times they are not brought into the knowledge of things, I think, in the proper way, because you seem to be a little bit disappointed by it.
Yes, sir. I was quite underwhelmed. Yes, sir.
So did you continue to go to your lodge still?
No, sir. What I did was I got into law school, and now I'm doing that. So I was underwhelmed with it, and yes, sir.
So what this experience gave to you in the end?
I enjoyed it as far as, like you mentioned, a social club. The food is very good at these places. I mean, I'm paying a membership. I know I can go, to any sort of a reciprocating Scottish Rite or Blue Lodge, as long as I show them I don't have my wallet on me, just an active dues card or a yearly paid dues card, I can get in. But I will tell you this much. Alex Jones said a good thing the other day that resonated with me. He said that I won't be part of any group that would have me, and the Masons, they definitely wanted to have me, you know, and it really wasn't much of a triage to get in, and so. But I wanted to know what was going on. I always wanted to learn, like you mentioned, the esoteric. I wasn't born into anything aristocratic. Hence the reason I sought you down. I saw you on Alex Jones' show and Penny Bradley, who speaks very highly of you, by the way. And so, just to increase my esoteric knowledge and me being younger than you, I really thought it was important to get any knowledge that you would volunteer out towards the just this younger crowd that I feel is lacking through no fault of their own. Mostly, it's just information like this or pertaining to these subjects isn't that readily available, and I don't think is being taught or handed down as much. And so, anyway,
I mean, when you go through the ancient Anacretic Scottish Rite, you go through all kinds of teachings. Like when you go through a lot of different rites, because I had the luck of going through different rites. You know, I mean, I started, of course, with the ancient Anacretic Scottish Rite, and I was lucky enough to have a great teacher that made me go through all from the Secret Master, Elu of 9, understanding the Elu of 12, the Royal Arch of Solomon, and all the things. But all these degrees, if you really have to take them seriously, you should study them for years. Yes. Because the knowledge they have is enormous and overwhelming at times. So I don't understand how they can give you 32 degree in the matter of it's impossible, because you will not be absorbing the teachings that they are giving you. At the same time, for those who are against Freemasonry, I completely understand why they're against Freemasonry, because Freemasonry has this secretive environment that wants to preserve, of course, certain things, and the discretion of Freemasonry favors, though, those people who maybe have the wrong reason for being there. And at times, at the end, I thought, I saw with my own eyes that the evildoers actually had, unfortunately, established themselves better than me within certain lodges, and I was like disappointed and shocked also at times. But in the end, this is how it is. So I commend you for what you have done. You have moved on. You have taken it as an experience. The social experience is, like you said, can be like just another rotary, another lie, another thing that it's of a networking that can be. I mean, for me, when I moved to America initially, it made me feel welcome that I had people that were, and I must say, I had a very good friend who unfortunately died during the pandemic, who wanted me to really be more active within Freemasonry here in California. But I realized soon after his death that those people who were talking about the values of brotherhood, of love, brotherly love, and all this, that then after they didn't even bother to let me know that my friend was dead. And it wasn't the first time. It wasn't the first time. I had another guy who was a 33-degree golden chain archivist from Rome, a very good a guy who I had helped because he had been under magical attack. I had exorcised him. I had went there with a guy from the Vatican to act. And when he died, they didn't let me know about his funeral. And so I said, what kind of people are you? You know, what kind of people are the Freemasons if in the moments that really are important, you don't communicate, you don't give that kind of real brotherly love. So I mean, it doesn't have to be only about talking about things. You have to practice them, and you have to. And so I think that unfortunately, though, today, like you said, too many forces from the progressive side, from the occult, have infiltrated Freemasonry, and they are transforming it in something that didn't used to be. But the reflection in our society, it's obvious. If you corrupt Freemasonry, then the profane society will also be corrupted by extent. So thank you for having me on today. We went, of course, through a chat that probably could have been extended. Maybe in the next few months we can have another chat and
would have been an opportunity.
discuss. I hope that you have at least appreciated my willingness to tell you at least about my own experience and also present you this knowledge that is in my books, which I find important not only for the profanes, but also for those who are Freemasons or those who had had an experience in Freemasonry and might appreciate them even more.
Yes, sir.
I personally, like you said, will no longer be active in groups like that because I don't see the right mindset. If the Freemasons were maybe different and they were the ones of 100 years ago, and maybe they had some values that I could, like conservative values that I could say, wow. But if it's becoming another outlet for the Democratic Party or for these people, no, forget it.
Yes,
and
sir.
It's like, unfortunately, it's going into that direction, no?
Yes, sir. No, I felt like I wasn't leaving there a better person. I do want to respect your time, though. And yes, I would love to pick up and do more episodes with you, which we can hash out later. But before we conclude the recording, if you could please tell people just how to find your work, and just if you want to just put out any websites or any social media, just how do people find you, follow up, reach out, or get a hold of your product?
For my books, you can simply go on Amazon and you just put Leo Lion Zagami and you get all my books. But you can also get my latest articles and the links to my latest books on leozagami.com, which I update regularly. And I think that is a great way to stay in contact with my work, and also go through a website which now has hundreds of articles which I've been publishing for years, and that can help you also understanding what is going on in the world. I try to do these books for people that are also not necessarily Masons, but like I said, people who are into Freemasonry and want to know more, they will definitely learn more. And they will also see that there is no wild speculation here made by some impostor. I mean, here is somebody who had an honest experience like yours, and who came out on the other side saying, well, I'm not really impressed. I've been impressed by certain people, not by others, by certain groups and not by others. My wife is the same. She said, I've made this experience, but I'm no longer interested in being associated with them. So it's something that happens. But I think that is an experience that in any way enriches us, because regardless of the humans that were involved in that lodge and in that obedience, in that group, you are conducting an experience on your own self, and that experience probably enriches you and makes you grow up. Know thyself, as they said. So that's how it should be. Know thyself, and then we will debate maybe in the future more. Thank you so much for having me on.
Okay, yes, sir. All right.